Salt Lake City has a story it tells the world. Fastest growing tech hub in the West, Silicon Slopes, young population, outdoor paradise. A city where ambition and opportunity converge beneath the Wasatch Mountains, and the future feels wide open. That story is not entirely wrong, but it is incomplete. And the part that is missing, the part nobody in Salt Lake wants to say out loud, is reshaping the city's future in ways that the headline numbers are carefully hiding. Today, Discover the States reveals Salt Lake City's real estate secret. Not the one told at housing forecast conferences, not the one printed in investment brochures. The one living inside the data that researchers, city officials, and market analysts have documented. But that rarely makes it into the narrative that Salt Lake City sells to the world. The secret has 7 parts. Each one is backed by real data. Together, they tell a story about what happens when a city grows faster than the people who live there can afford to stay. Secret number 1: more than 80% of Salt Lake homes are out of reach. Here is the number that should be the headline of every Salt Lake City housing story, and almost never is. More than 80% of homes currently on the Salt Lake City metro market are unaffordable to the typical household, according to a Bankrate analysis published by Axios Salt Lake City in January 2026. 80% of Salt Lake City metro homes on the market are unaffordable to the median household, higher than the already alarming national rate of 75%. Researchers defined affordability as housing costs below 30% of gross household income, the standard threshold used by economists, lenders, and housing policy experts worldwide. To afford the median Salt Lake City home, a household needs to earn $113,000 per year. The median household income in the Salt Lake metro is below that threshold, and that affordability gap is not a temporary condition caused by recent rate increases. It is structural. According to the Salt Lake Board of Realtors, the median multiple home price divided by median household income in Salt Lake County shot up to 5.4 in 2023. A ratio above 5.1 is classified as severely unaffordable by international housing standards. Just a decade ago, Salt Lake's ratio was under 4.0. The run-up in home prices from 2017 to 2022 was so extreme that it permanently relocated this city from moderately unaffordable to severely unaffordable, a classification it shares with markets like Los Angeles and Miami. The income needed to afford a median single-family home, priced around $600,000 in Salt Lake City, is approximately $170,000 per year. The actual median household income is closer to $80,000. That is a gap of $90,000 per year, more than an entire median annual income, separating what the market demands and what the typical Salt Lake family earns. 80% of homes unaffordable. A price-to-income ratio classified as severely unaffordable. A $90,000 annual income gap. These are the numbers Salt Lake City's housing narrative does not lead with. They should. Secret number 2: the first-time buyer has nearly disappeared. Salt Lake City used to be a haven for young homeowners. In a nation where coastal cities priced out their young populations decades ago, Utah's capital was celebrated as a place where first-time buyers could still find a path. Young families, starter homes, the first rung of the housing ladder still within reach. That distinction is gone. According to KL.com's reporting on the Salt Lake Board of Realtors, January 2026 housing forecast event featuring James Wood, Ivory Boyer Senior Fellow at the University of Utah's Kem C, Gardner Policy Institute, the percentage of first-time buyers nationwide plummeted to just 21% last year, the lowest level recorded since at least 1980. And the median first-time homeowner is now approximately 40 years old, about a decade older than historical averages. In Salt Lake City, where home prices have surged $241,000 on average for existing homeowners from 2020 to 2025, according to Castle reporting, the entry cost for a first-time buyer has become extraordinary. A median $550,000 Salt Lake County home with a standard mortgage at current rates translates to roughly $3,000 per month in principal and interest alone before property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, and maintenance. For a young adult in Salt Lake City earning a typical entry-level wage in tech, healthcare, or the service industry, that monthly payment is not aspirational. It is mathematically impossible, without either significant family wealth transfer or a dual income that exceeds what most young households earn. The consequence of this is what Salt Lake City Real Estate Analyst Commentary and the Salt Lake City Housing Stability Division's own dashboard describe with precision. Vacancy rates at historic lows, housing prices rising beyond what construction alone can fix, and a generation of young Salt Lake residents who are renting not by choice, but because ownership has been priced beyond their reach. James Wood put it plainly at the January 2026 forecast event. A speaker at the same event said, "This is going to stall the housing market. We need these young buyers to come into the market for the health and vibrancy of the housing market, but they're struggling to get there." When a city that once prided itself on young home ownership loses its first-time buyers to an affordability ceiling, it does not just lose a market segment. It loses the foundation on which every healthy housing market is built. Secret number 3: sales per 1,000 people have returned to Great Recession levels. Salt Lake City's housing market looks active on the surface. Prices are still elevated. Some neighborhoods still see competitive offers. The city still ranks among Zillow's top 10 hottest markets heading into 2026. But beneath that surface is a transaction volume number that should be deeply alarming to anyone who owns property in Salt Lake County. Sales per 1,000 people in Salt Lake County have returned to levels last seen during the Great Recession, according to James Wood at the Gardner Policy Institute's January 2026 forecast event, as reported by Cal.com. The Great Recession, the worst economic period in modern American history. That is the benchmark against which Salt Lake County's current transaction volume is being measured and matching. Here is why this matters. In a functioning housing market, a certain proportion of homes change hands every year. People buy and sell. Equity is realized. The market breathes. When that transaction rate falls to Great Recession levels, in a city with prices near all-time highs, it tells you something fundamental has broken in the relationship between sellers, buyers, and price. Residential sales in Salt Lake County dipped 2.4% in 2025 from 2024, continuing the same trend from 2024 according to Gardner Institute data. The median days on market rose from 29 days to 36 days, and according to Redfin's August 2025 data, the median home price in July 2025 was $565,000, about 2.6% lower than the prior year. That price dip in a single month. In a city with a Great Recession-level transaction volume. In a market where 80% of homes are unaffordable to median households. These 3 data points: Great Recession transaction volume, rising days on market, and a median price already showing dips, are not individually alarming in isolation. Together, they describe a market whose headline strength is concealing a deepening transaction freeze. A market that appears hot because prices are still elevated and inventory is still constrained, not because demand is genuinely strong. Secret number 4: migration is slowing and no one wants to say why. The story Salt Lake City tells about itself depends entirely on one engine: in migration. The steady, confident flow of people choosing to come here from California, from Seattle, from New York, drawn by the mountains, the tech jobs, the relative affordability compared to coastal markets. That engine is slowing, and the reason is not comfortable to say aloud. According to KSL.com's reporting on Gardner Institute data, the number of people moving into Utah accounted for just 43% of the state's growth, in 2025 the lowest percentage in 4 years. Utah's net migration is slowing, and James Wood's commentary at the January 2026 housing forecast event was direct about the probable cause: rising costs. The city that marketed itself as California's affordable escape is no longer clearly affordable. According to Tradingpedia, Utah is now the 3rd least affordable state for homebuyers in the entire country, behind only California and Hawaii. Only California and Hawaii have higher home price to income ratios than Utah. The Beehive State has joined the coastal markets it was supposed to offer relief from, and the lock-in effect is compounding the migration slowdown in a way that creates a vicious cycle. According to Gardner Institute data cited by KSL, over 60% of Salt Lake mortgage holders still have rates below 4% from before the 2022 interest rate increases. Those homeowners are not selling, not because the market is strong, but because selling means giving up a sub 4% mortgage and taking on a 6% to 7% rate on a new purchase. That lock-in effect suppresses inventory. Suppressed inventory keeps prices elevated. Elevated prices slow new in-migration from buyers who can no longer find Salt Lake affordable relative to their origin markets. The migration engine that powered Salt Lake City's decade-long housing appreciation is losing fuel. And the city's housing market, built on the assumption that growth would always outrun affordability, is beginning to confront what happens when that assumption weakens. Secret number 5: job growth is at its lowest since the Great Recession. Salt Lake City's Silicon Slopes brand was built on one promise above all others: jobs. The tech companies that relocated here, the Adobe offices, the Goldman Sachs campus, the healthcare systems, created an employment narrative that justified rising home prices and attracted the in-migration that sustained them. That narrative is under pressure from a data point that almost no one is leading with in the mainstream Salt Lake housing conversation. Job growth in Salt Lake County is projected at just 1.5% for 2025, and into 2026 the lowest level of annual job growth since the Great Recession, according to Kale.com's reporting on Gardner Institute projections. The county is expected to add approximately 27,000 new jobs, continuing what James Wood described explicitly as the lowest job growth trajectory since the post-2008 period. Jobs and housing are inseparable. When employment growth is robust, it attracts workers, creates household formation, and drives housing demand. When job growth slows to decade lows, the demand pipeline that justified years of price appreciation begins to thin. At the same time, Salt Lake City faces a structural challenge that Silicon Slopes has not resolved. The jobs being created are not accessible to the majority of Salt Lake residents. According to Alpha Funding Corp's 2025-2026 Salt Lake City Real Estate Outlook, housing affordability pressure for entry-level buyers persists, even as build-to-rent and multifamily supply increases. The tech jobs of Silicon Slopes pay well, but they are concentrated in a specific demographic and skill set. The service industry, healthcare support, and logistics workers who make Salt Lake City function every day are not the beneficiaries of the Silicon Slopes employment story, and they are the residents for whom the affordability crisis is most acute. The lowest job growth since the Great Recession, an employment base concentrated in high-income tech sectors, an affordability gap between what homes cost and what most workers earn. These are the forces quietly undermining the employment story that Salt Lake City's housing narrative depends on. Secret number 6: the inventory illusion. More homes, same broken math. In 2025 and heading into 2026, Salt Lake City is often described as having more inventory than it has had in years. More homes to choose from, better options for buyers, a market finally offering some breathing room after years of brutal undersupply. That narrative is true, and it is completely misleading. According to the Salt Lake City Housing Market Update for August 2025, inventory in July 2025 jumped 33.7% year-over-year with 842 homes on the market. The biggest inventory change visible in the market data. According to Axios Salt Lake City reporting on the 2026 market forecast, Realtor.com's Hannah Jones noted there is more inventory in Utah's capital due to new construction activity. Here is what is not being said about that inventory increase. More homes on the market does not fix the affordability equation if none of the additional inventory is affordable. According to Bankrate's analysis, 80% of Salt Lake City homes are unaffordable to the median household. Additional inventory at the same price points does not change that ratio. It simply means there are more unaffordable options to choose from. The new construction driving inventory growth in Salt Lake County is concentrated in the $400,000 to $700,000 range, precisely the range that is unaffordable to the median household earning below the $113,000 threshold required. According to the Salt Lake Tribune's January 2026 reporting on Utah housing affordability, a Washington County home requires a buyer to earn $149,000 per year, more than double the county's $77,000 median household income. The same structural disconnect defines Salt Lake County's new construction pipeline. And according to BestUtahRealEstate.com's 2026 outlook, the most likely scenario for Utah's housing market is stagnation with pockets of correction, where median prices hold roughly flat, while overheated areas retrace gains, and days on market lengthen. More inventory, same broken affordability math, and a market where sellers who bought at 2021 or 2022 prices are now competing against new construction and against each other with the pool of buyers who can actually qualify shrinking at the same time inventory is growing. More supply into weakening qualified demand is not relief. It is pressure. And that pressure is building. Secret number 7: Salt Lake City is exporting its own workforce. This is the secret that no one in Salt Lake City's real estate and economic development community wants to say out loud, because it contradicts the entire growth narrative the city has built its identity around. Salt Lake City is pricing out the people it needs to function. The housing affordability crisis in Salt Lake City is not just a hardship for individual families, it is a structural economic threat. When teachers, nurses, firefighters, restaurant workers, retail employees, and entry-level tech workers cannot afford to live in the city where they work, those workers leave. Not eventually. Now, according to the Salt Lake Tribune's January 2026 reporting, Utah housing experts and local real estate leaders are raising an alarm that has not penetrated the mainstream narrative yet. Speaking about the need for starter homes, one housing analyst said, "The fastest way to destroy a city's culture and identity is to export all of our kids and import their replacements." The same analysis warns, we need to create starter homes if we want our kids and grandkids to stay here and not leave, because they are chasing affordable housing somewhere else. The median first-time homeowner is now 40 years old. The percentage of first-time buyers has fallen to 21%, the lowest since 1980, and Utah's net in-migration accounted for just 43% of state growth in 2025, the lowest share in 4 years. These are the footprints of a city that is exporting its workforce. Young adults born and raised in Salt Lake City, educated at the University of Utah or Utah State, entering careers in the city's economy, are being priced out before they can build equity, before they can form households, before they can become the stable, rooted community members that healthy cities depend on. According to the Salt Lake City Housing Stability Division's own Housing Indicators dashboard, the city itself acknowledges it is increasingly becoming a city out of reach for many of our residents and workers. That is not an outside critic. That is the city of Salt Lake City's own housing agency describing what is happening to the city they are charged with managing. A city out of reach for its own residents and workers is not a city with a housing market problem. It is a city with an identity crisis. And the data on affordability, on first-time buyers, on transaction volumes, on migration, on job growth, on inventory all points to the same uncomfortable truth. The secret Salt Lake City's real estate narrative has been keeping is this: the growth that built this market has outrun the foundation that can sustain it. And what looks like strength from the outside is, from the inside, a city racing to remain affordable for the people who make it worth living in. Let's be honest, as we always are on this channel, Salt Lake City is not failing. The Wasatch Front economy remains real. Zillow still projects SELC among the nation's top 10 hottest markets heading into 2026. The Gardner Institute projects continued modest price appreciation. Employment in tech, healthcare, and logistics is still growing, even if at the lowest rate since the Great Recession. The city itself is genuinely beautiful, genuinely livable, genuinely worth the fight to make it accessible. But the secret the data reveals is undeniable. More than 80% of homes are unaffordable to the median household. First-time buyers have reached a 44-year low share of 21%. Sales per 1,000 people have returned to Great Recession levels. Net in-migration accounted for only 43% of state growth in 2025, the lowest in 4 years. Job growth is at its lowest since the Great Recession. Inventory is rising, but the affordable inventory is not, and the city's own housing agency says Salt Lake City is becoming a city out of reach for its own residents and workers. These are not the numbers of a city in crisis. They are the numbers of a city at a crossroads. A city that expanded faster than its affordability could support, and is now confronting the cost of that imbalance. The real estate secret Salt Lake City does not want to admit is that the dream it sold of opportunity, of accessibility, of a place where ambition and affordability could coexist, is no longer available to the majority of the people who live there. Understanding this matters. Housing markets built on narratives eventually answer to data. And the data is no longer keeping Salt Lake City's secret. Thank you for watching this in-depth report from Discover the States. If you found this analysis valuable, leave a comment with your perspective. Share this video to spread awareness. And make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what comes next.